Hello and welcome back to the channel. Welcome to this video for the new ones. And this is a part 2 of my previous one. I will be sharing tips on how to land your dream job, your next job. And I got these tips from two amazing women. The previous video was tips that were from the perspective of somebody who is interviewing. And I did give their credentials. I will just share a quick summary here. The first lady is 31. She is currently a business development manager. She started out in corporate banking as a relationship manager and was able to pivot multiple times over the past decade or so into different jobs, okay. And she was able to get hired each time and just progress with her career. So we did get tips from her perspective of how she's managed to do it. And today's video I will be getting tips from the interviewer's point of view, so the person on the other side of the table who is determining whether you get recruited or not, as well as just have vast experience over the past almost 25 years of working in tech. So she is 43. Like I have mentioned, she started out in tech, she pivoted to innovation, and now works with a combined specialty of tech and innovation, and she's a chief technology officer of a global organization. So our executive has worked in the NGO space. Our manager from part one, who was giving us advice, worked predominantly in the private sector. So without further ado, I will now pick the brain or let you know the advice and tips that we got from our executive. So the first thing was your CV and or resume and how you should write it, draft it, or just present it. So her first tip was to never include your photo on your CV. So for most jobs, most corporate jobs out there, most people are not going to ask you for your photo. So if it's not required, do not include it, because sometimes you might look like somebody, that the recruiter doesn't like, or people could have biases against your race, your gender, you name it. Just don't put your picture there. The next tip was to check for grammatical errors on your CV. Double check, triple check is what she said. Make sure you check, because for some people that is extremely off-putting. You could have made so much sense in what it is that you had, listed on your CV, but she mentioned that if she's going through someone's CV and she notices two or more grammatical errors, she just puts it aside. Because if somebody is demonstrating that they lack that ability to, pay attention to detail like that, they will fail. Even in whatever role that they're being, hired for, they will fail to just have that attention to detail, and they'll mess things up for the potential employer. So definitely make sure that you check your grammar. The next tip was do not list your hobbies. And as she said, we stopped doing that in 1990. And that really tickled me, because I know there was a point in time. So by the way, I'm 34. So when I was now, putting my CV out in my late teens and early 20s, I was one of those people that would list hobbies. She says that is extremely redundant, because putting your hobby on your CV adds literally no value. The only time she says you can include a hobby if it is a hobby that can help you demonstrate, your skill set or your character. And one example she gave was it could be mountain climbing. You could now use that hobby in an interview and say, with mountain climbing, I'm able to, demonstrate resilience and just, mental tenacity, things like that. But don't, what I like cooking. Those are things that will add no value to your CV, as she put it. The next tip is that the first half of the first page of your CV, and for part one, just to refresh, even with our manager who gave us tips, she said if you're entry level or even just mid level, like your CV should not be more than 2 pages. So we're working with the 2 page maximum CV here. Our executive says the first half of the first page of your CV should be eye catching. Okay, it should immediately catch the eye of the recruiter, and try and make it as clear as possible as to what they'll be getting from you based on the job that is being advertised. Make sure you customize your CV to the job description that has been advertised, and don't make it generic. Like I am hardworking, I am time conscientious. Like those are very generic things, and recruiters are literally sifting through hundreds and hundreds of CVs. So you need to make yourself stand out. And she did add that telling them what primary school you went to is a big no-no, which really, really tickled me. It is extremely redundant. And on schooling, to expand on that, do not put your primary school. Even if you're someone who's just finished college or university and trying to get into the workspace, she said the earliest qualification or schooling you should include on your CV is just like your high school. High school. Don't go all the way. Like don't start if you went to six schools, from grade one, you don't need to include all of that on your CV. Usually nobody cares. It is not important. Just list the schooling if you need be, or where you got your high school certification. And to just, further emphasize on that first half of that first page, make sure you open with your accomplishments. And she said when it comes to accomplishments, she uses a method of accomplishments so that. So there's always this so that. And an example is it could be for someone who's a personal assistant, you can say, you can list an accomplishment of I supported the CTO with calendaring and booking flights. And instead of leaving it there, or this is what I do, you can say so that the CTO was able to free up space and attend to more serious decision making, tasks or strategies that you needed to attend to. When you do this, you're able to, show people that you add value to the current role that you have, even as you're trying to get into their organization. The next tip is to never forget to include your contact details on your CV itself. So don't take it for granted that you emailed your CV, and if they're interested in you, they don't have to start shifting back to when you sent that email. Make sure your name, your phone number, your email address, and any other way in which they can contact you is clearly listed on your CV, because sometimes people forget to do that. The next tip has to do with your cover letter, and she emphasized on do not make your cover letter a replica of your CV. Your cover letter should now, focus on highlights of what you're able to do and what you're going to bring to the table. And by highlighting, accomplishments, you could also highlight new ways in which you add value to this organization, but still related to the job that is being advertised for. So don't just say this is who I am, I'm interested in the job. Actually highlight new and interesting ways, like I had mentioned, in which you add value to the company on your cover letter. Also, even with the cover letter, just like the CV, make it quick and make it clear. Don't put too many things there. And she really, really, encouraged people to start writing or just publishing, because she gave an example of the hire that she got in her career. It got to a point where for her cover letter, it would just be literally two sentences of I'm interested in your role. And if you would like to know more about, my thought process on this particular subject, kindly see this link below. And then it could be a link to an article that you may have written or a publication that shared your work. And with regards to you writing online or just having links to your work and how you want to be perceived, your online presence is extremely important. Whatever it is that you do online, and we are constantly talking about having a digital footprint, but most of us don't take it seriously. Okay, most of us don't take it seriously. Let your social media, your YouTube channel, if you have one, your channels be a representation of who you are and how you want to be perceived. And I will give a bit of a story time. So it wasn't a future employer or me being, having a job at stake, but I have been in a situation. It was quite fun. I can laugh about it now, but it was so nerve wracking in the moment where I was in a very high level meeting, and we were talking about, content creation strategies, and then someone someone mentioned me. I was brought up of, oh, she has a YouTube channel, and literally I wanted to sink into the ground because very senior people were sat in front of me with like their corporate diaries and pens saying, what is your YouTube channel name? And in that moment I had to tell them Chitta Diaries, but trust me, like I wanted to sink into the ground, because in that moment and in the space that I was in, my YouTube channel was not a reflection of how I wanted to be perceived by these people. So yeah, just keep that in mind. So we will now move on to the next point, or the next topic that I wanted her to give us advice on, and that is academic and professional qualifications. So for her, she said, honestly, it depends on where you are and the context of your situation. But she did emphasize that if you are an African, and I laughed so hard when she said this, that if you are an African, you need a degree. It could be a degree in grass management, as she joked, but get that degree, because most of our institutions here still value an academic qualification. However, if you're in a field like marketing, you could use a professional certification or even just portfolio work for tech because she's predominantly in tech. She says nowadays you could even be self-taught in tech. You may not necessarily need an academic qualification, but for the rest of us, or just most of us in traditional jobs, traditional corporate jobs, you will need at the very least a first degree, and especially for us, okay, on the African continent or just third world countries, you really still need that first degree. So if you do have an academic qualification and you start to work, she did advise that, just like our manager did in part one, she did advise that you get a professional qualification just to add on to that academic qualification, because a lot of the time the professional qualification has a lot more to do with the work that you're actually doing versus an academic, first degree that tends to be generic. She also encouraged all of us to do a lot of reading on whatever field that we're in, whatever field that we want to get into, because it demonstrates our learning abilities. And on this one, I was just like, oh, I am so guilty. As somebody who doom scrolls on TikTok during all of my free time, like the brain rot is real. So yeah, she encouraged all of us, to just read more, take that interest on our own, to just learn more on whatever is current in our fields. Then on the same topic of qualifications, whether academic or professional, she did advise that the best way sometimes, or if the opportunity is there for you, is to get assistance from your employer, especially if you work for like a really like a good or a sensible organization. A lot of these companies do have some sort of staff development program that's there. You just need to ask, you need to find out. And if you're an exceptional employee, like you already excel, you go above and beyond, your employer would be willing, to just put aside a little bit of money here and there to assist you, with upgrading yourself. They can pay for your tuition, or maybe it could be an exam fee. But if you just ask, or make that effort to find out if that program, is something that you can have access to, definitely look into that in terms of upgrading your qualifications. And again, with regards to upgrading your qualifications, just like our manager had hinted to, or alluded to rather, in part one, is that, as our executive now like specified here, is try and avoid linear upgrades with your academic and professional qualifications. A lot of us will pick one thing and go from, a degree in finance, a master's in finance, a this in finance, etc. in finance. You may just be making yourself redundant, unfortunately, and especially in, the current environment that we are in 2026, that could, that could actually disadvantage you. So she said, try and look for new and interesting and niche, certifications that will make you stand out from the rest, because it's those people who actually get picked for opportunities. And she did give an example of herself where she started out with a diploma in management systems, and that was like, like her very first qualification. And then she, got a job, and then while she was working, she got a bachelor's of business computing. And at that point, she realized that, she had the academic papers that she needed to prove, that she knows her stuff, and she also had the work experience, and she opted to pivot. She did not, automatically, go and get a master's in IT as well, but she did look for a very niche, certification at that time that nobody was doing, but she realized that it was something that was going to become very important in the near future that a lot of people didn't even know about. And because she had that certification on hand, she was, awarded the opportunity to lead on a new project that came up at work. Okay, our next topic has to do with internal promotions. So for internal promotions, she did note that she realized that she initially did have a very narrow view of how things worked, because she has predominantly worked in the NGO space and she's around people, who are do-gooders, but it may not be the case for everyone, so it actually depends. But despite that, she said there's still some fundamental things that apply wherever you are. And the first thing, of course, is hard work. You actually need to be good at your job. So first thing is hard work. But even more important than hard work when it comes to an internal promotion or an internal upgrade is getting an internal sponsor at work. Because you can work as hard as you want, but if nobody is seeing what you're doing, it won't matter. In a lot of situations, your boss will get all the credit for your hard work, and that will be the end of that. So always have someone that has, influence and power, who is aware of the work that you are doing. and is able to see it. The third tip with regards to internal promotions is to understand organizational policies very well. So read up on them, ask, find out, because you could literally be sleeping on opportunities that are available to you. It could be grading systems and how promotions are awarded. And sometimes a lot of us don't even know that these systems are in place. So definitely do that research, find out, just be proactive about it. The next tip is to look for opportunities outside of your department, outside of your actual primary role, because this puts you in spaces with people outside of your work and it helps with your networking. But of course, she did add a caveat of don't take on too much work where your primary role starts to suffer and then, you end up losing out on both ends. So, definitely proceed with caution, but still take an interest in learning, other things outside your work within an organization if you want to be upgraded in that organization. And a good example that she gave is that, in her early days, she did join like the staff association. So even though she worked in like tech support, she knew that within her own section, she would never be given, or it would be very rare for her to be given the opportunity to speak in front of senior management. But when she was, someone who was, a tech support under the staff association, she was now going to present on behalf of the staff association to senior management. So hopefully that makes sense. Whereas in a section, like I said, her boss would always have that opportunity to make that presentation. So now because she's there under the staff association, she's now making herself visible to senior management. So the next section or the next topic is external vacancy applications. And our first tip is be ready. Okay, be ready in advance and not when a job advert comes up. Make yourself busy in a productive way, attend events, participate in projects, and write articles or get your work published. This is very, very important. And it made me think I do have another friend who does really, really well on LinkedIn, and she is so intentional about it. She loves the work that she does. And that's who I thought of, when I saw this tip. And this is important, okay, because you're doing stuff you can point at 1 year, 2 years, 5 years down the line in an interview versus getting an interview or applying for a job and then having to start from scratch, trying to prove what it is that you're about and what you have accomplished. Start way before so that you have this on record to demonstrate in an interview saying, this is who I am and what I have been about for many years. And that is actually very impressive. The next tip for external vacancy applications is to do thorough research on the company that you are applying to. Understand their values, their mission, and what is important to them. Also ensure to find the latest information on this company. Yes, it's good to see what they're about, where they've come from, but make sure that you're actually up to date on what is current with them, because sometimes you could find a company at a point in which they're pivoting. By doing research on what they're currently doing, this could really set you apart in an interview because you aren't just going there and being generic. And she gave an example: if you're applying to, for example, like a retail um, company and you're going there as a sales rep and all you're doing is presenting yourself as a sales rep, and this company may have just invested in a completely different sort of subsidiary, and that's the direction that they're going. If you sell yourself for this new direction that the company is going, like, you really stand out as opposed to you just showing up and saying, I'm here, I want to fill in the role of a sales rep. Sell yourself as, I will fill in a sales rep even as you pivot to this direction that your company is going. So do a lot of research. You should always aim to leave that interview and have the recruiters think, oh my goodness, like, we cannot carry on, like, our company will collapse without this person. Like, that's the joke that our executive made. Like, make sure you leave that lasting impression that this company needs you. So try as much as possible to do your research on them. And even just to add on you know doing this further research, if they have publications, they have a website, even just look up their name on any recent news articles, or what's been happening with them. If they have a YouTube channel, if they have socials, go through everything. Try and learn the way in which they communicate, the way in which they tell stories, and even the way you sell yourself, the way you speak in an interview. try and sound like them, because when they're listening to you, when they're watching you, you will look familiar. And in their minds, they will say, okay, this is somebody who could easily, match with the culture of this organization. Like, we won't have to work too hard, trying to onboard them. They they already are a good fit for us. So try as much as possible, to make yourself blend in with this company and their culture. And not only that, of course, in that effort, to make yourself stand out, try and see any gaps, that you think the company might have, and sell yourself in a way in which you can fill these gaps, to add value to the organization. And with that being said, with regards to, an external vacancy application, we'll now move on to tips on the actual interview, whether, you're applying for an external or one within your company. The first tip, she said, is common sense, and this is be early, be on time, do whatever it needs, do whatever you need to do to just curb any eventualities. If you're using public transportation and it takes you an hour to get to where you think you need to be, sort of 2 hours earlier, 2.5 hours earlier, but never take for granted, okay, that someone will forgive you for an emergency and whatnot. Nobody cares about that. Be on time. Like, this is, the first point, but it's honestly so important and should never be overlooked. The next point is to dress well and to dress conservatively. And our manager in part one did emphasize on this point as well. So it's extremely important. Our executive added that an interview is not a moment of my body, my choice. Okay, now is not the time for that. Unfortunately, it is just the harsh truth. If you know what your society frowns upon, avoid that. Avoid that at all costs in a job interview. It is not the time to prove a point. And to just, like further elaborate on that, for us Zambians, if you're a Zambian watching this, you know how conservative you are, how conservative we are. If you have tattoos, cover them. She said if you have neck tattoos up to your ears, wear a turtleneck. Cover that. Okay. If you have piercings, take them off. Just do not have that for your interview. I know in part one I talked about makeup, nails, hair, briefly about hair. and I mentioned I would further elaborate in this one, even with regards to natural hair. I love natural hair. I don't ruffle too many feathers, but we know the type of societal biases that we have here. And again, it's not the time to make a stance. This is literally a job interview. Okay, get that contract signed and then get into the workplace. And I know some people will say, if someone is going to judge me for my hair or my look, then it's not the company that I want to work for. Fine, be that way. And she also added that if your identity means that much to you, then either show up as yourself, try your luck, or avoid the place that you think won't be a fit for you. But for the rest of us, like, let's let's pick our battles. Do you really want a tattoo or a piercing, being the thing that keeps you from a job? And I know some people may say, I will work in the liberal space. Right now, you're young. You might be young right now. And yes, granted, you might do really well in a liberal space, or a company that doesn't mind someone having tattoos or piercings. But what if you do so well, okay, and an opportunity in a more traditional firm comes up offering you triple the amount? Are you going to turn it down when all that you needed to do was just not show your tattoos at work? Think about it. But again, if that's who you're about and what you want to do, you do you. But for the rest of us, it's just common sense. And when it comes to internal biases, sometimes it's not even malicious. Okay, you could be dealing with an interviewer who is well-meaning. This could be someone who tries to check themselves. They try not to have biases, but the point is, they grow up in a society that has, forced these internalized biases at them. So even as you walk into an interview with face piercings or a neck tattoo, they will still be distracted by it. Even if they want to be nice, they will spend, actual, like, conscious time telling themselves to not look at you and judge you, and they'll miss a point that, like, they'll miss a point that you just made as you were answering a question from a different, like, the point is, you still distracted them. You still distracted them, and you don't want to do that. So hopefully I made myself clear on that point. So for the next tip, and this one was targeted towards women, and again, I will be like shouting out, like my Zambian girlies, because I am Zambian, and I do feel like I have quite a good, Zambian following, and they're the ones who are watching, especially my personal finance chats. And she wanted to acknowledge the fact that a lot of us have been raised or conditioned to be meek in character. So it's one thing to say just be confident, go to an interview and be confident, but a lot of us weren't raised to be that way. So it might seem a bit out of character. But unfortunately, you have no choice but to find that confidence, because at the end of the day, that's what we're here for. Like, this is a job that you feel like you deserve, and you have to express, yourself in a manner in which people have confidence in you too. She gave, advice on an exercise that she encourages, women to do like way before an interview, or even just right before, the night before, is to just sit down and remind yourself of your accomplishments. Remind yourself, what you bring to the table, and just let yourself know that you actually deserve this. Put yourself in a mental space way before, be calm, and literally hype yourself, and you remind yourself of, how good you are, and that might just help once you get into the interview room. The next point was to have an example, and again, this is more like pre-interview prep. Think of any possible question that you think the interviewers might and have an example for your answer to that question. It really, really, makes you look like you know your stuff and you aren't just BSing. Because if someone, for example, like she gave, if someone asks you how you handle conflict, it's very easy to say, oh, when, to handle conflict, this is the type of, like a very procedural answer of how one should handle conflict, in a situation in an office with, could be a colleague or a client. But if you have an example instead, you can give an actual real life example, like a viable example of what you did and how you successfully handled conflict. Like, give an actual example. And every question should have a real life example of how you have already done this before, or how you would do it, not just a generic answer. Because now people actually believe that, oh, this person knows what they're talking about, and they are very ready to, to be, to land on their feet and, run with the role that they'll be given. And yeah, from this, I guess we can quickly segue. It's kind of part of the interview process, though it could even be post interview when you're actually offered a job. This is how to ask, for a particular amount, or how much to ask for. And similar to what our manager, advised us in part one, though for the executive, she says something, yeah, it still depends. Because for her, she was saying it depends. And that's why I'm glad I got her perspective as well. For our manager, like, she is a superstar. Like, she was giving excellent tips from someone who is excellent. Okay, she has excelled every step of the way. And with our executive, and from the perspective of the interviewer, she knows, it can be a spectrum sometimes, depending on the type of role that you're going for, the level in your career, that you are with. But still, she says at the end of the day, still do your research of, how much this role, is offered for on the market. And she did give a tip of, if you're unable to find out from people, because people do gatekeep their salaries, she says ChatGPT, can be helpful. It can give you some estimates of, how much a company would be able to offer for that role. And you can use that to ask. And ChatGPT does give a range, so there'll be a lower range and a higher range. She said, pick the higher range and even add some sort of percentage margin. And just like our manager had said, even for our executive, she said, do not be afraid. Most people are afraid to ask for more, but believe in yourself. Be good at your job, and believe that this is something you deserve, and go into that negotiation, with a higher figure with which you can negotiate with the company. Because most of the time, companies might actually have a budget for the industry rate, but they will purposely lowball a new entrant, because they want that entrant to start at the very minimum so they can save. Everybody wants to save. So never be afraid to start high, and then, negotiate with this employer. And if they do offer you, something low, like, don't feel bad, that you have oversold yourself. Like, if it's meant for you and you deserve it, and you're actually good, and you're able to sell yourself well in that interview, these people do come back and say, we really want you, we'll offer you this amount. Or if they genuinely can't afford it, they'll at least try to match or come close to what you offered. So yeah, that's a tip on how much to ask for. To add on to the actual interview process as well, just some general etiquette, during the interview. Always, try and look at the recruiters, even as they're asking you. Be confident, look at them, be sincere in your answers, and give your attention to each person that is asking you a question. Don't don't be shifty. Someone asks you a question, give them your attention, respond to them in that manner. And then she did say there are some people, out here who are attending interviews virtually. It could be, an online interview. She said you need to treat this like a production because that could make or break your interview. And the first tip she gave was that most people tend to put their camera on their desk, and it creates a very awkward angle for people on the other side. So just in case you didn't know, try and if you don't have a tripod, just put up some books or something where your camera is, is facing directly in front of you versus below you. She also said, try and have, a very clear background, don't make it busy. And lighting is also important. So she said, especially if it's an interview at night, like if you don't have a ring light, borrow one from a friend. And also, she said it's very, very important to test out the technology that you're going to use for the interview. Find out from the interviewers what technology would they be using. Would it be Google Meets? Will it be Zoom? Download that application, or if you already have it, make sure you've updated it. Test it with a friend. Test your gadgets, your microphone, make sure it works. You do not want any inconveniences. Check your network. Okay, do what you need to do prior to that interview so that it goes, seamlessly on your end. The next question I'd asked her, the next topic had to do with recruiters. I know with our manager, in part one, she, highly recommended recruiters. And for our executive, for her, it wasn't too much of like a big deal for her. Like she's not very, very pro recruiters, but if you do use a recruiter, she said there's some red flags you should look out for and just do not proceed with certain recruiters who aren't professional. Like if they're DMing you, like they're sending you a DM on, on Facebook, if they aren't professional, if there's grammatical errors, in just them reaching out to you. She said those are not recruiters that you want to send your papers to, or recruiters who you want to help you find a job. She also talked about recruiters who don't follow up on a date and time that they said that they would. Ignore those, move on with your life. Like they're most likely very unserious and will not take you anywhere in terms of finding a job. And that was all with regards to like the main questions that I asked her. And I did ask if she had any other, tips that she had to add on. And I will just list them quickly in conclusion to this video. So the first, thing to note in our conclusion, she said emotional intelligence will take you a lot further than hard work in the workplace. And this is, about knowing when to speak, knowing, who to speak to, knowing when to bite your tongue, no matter how hard it is, knowing how to navigate relationships with difficult or combative people so that you're not in the dirt with them. Because they're like the other people who are just willing to be combative and take you down with them. Like you need to have that emotional intelligence, to kind of decipher who, where, or when, to engage in certain matters or not. And this made me laugh because this is something I personally need to work on, guys. Like 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 I am always ready to insult someone. Like it doesn't take much for me to be triggered. Like I get so upset. Like I will fight every fight. I will fight every fight because I won't sleep. Like if someone upset me, I won't sleep because I'm like, I like there's no way I let them walk away with for me with what they said and it's okay. Like I won't sleep. I need to get my leg back, and I really need to work on that because like I do acknowledge it's quite childish. So I listened to that tip and I was like, oh, this is something I really need to introspect on. And yeah, just to continue with her, with her tip on emotional intelligence, she says you need to know when to be gentle and when to be direct. As these soft skills will literally determine, how you progress in an organization. Try and figure out a way in which you can walk around where people, respect you, but don't walk over you. But it shouldn't be a situation where everyone respects you to a point where they fear you or they just avoid you or they think you're difficult. It shouldn't get to an extent where people, see you as someone who is impossible to work with. Strive to be a team player. Our next tip was integrity is very key. And honestly, even I agree so much. Like, guys, have integrity. Have integrity in everything that you do at the workplace. There might be people around you being shady. Girl, like, don't do it. Okay, have integrity. Even that helps you progress and advance, in your organization, in your career, in life, even outside of the organization. That integrity will help you out. is also very vital to figure out how to navigate office politics, especially as a woman who is ambitious and are aiming to progress. Because as a woman, you could be young, you could be black, if you're in a more global setup like she is, being young, black, and a woman, like people will be trying you every single day, and you need to decide what you're going to spend your energy on. Like, are you going to spend all your energy fighting battles? Because the more that you do that, the more you prove these people right, because now you're taking time away from the work that you should actually be doing. You'll be missing deadlines, you'll be failing with KPIs, and they'll point at that. And she said yes. It's again, it depends, on your situation and what you're in. Different for everyone, granted. And she did emphasize, please, like this has to be, thought about on an individual basis, and her strategy may not work for other people. There are some people who are combative 24/7, and they have managed, to like that's what works for them and the context and the environment that they're in. But for her, she acknowledged that if she was someone who fought every battle, if you're someone who was constantly combative, it would end up just affecting, her mood and her mental health. So she's not about that life. But her strategy is, she does have a couple of non-negotiables that she has just set a standard for, where these are things where no one can say this or do this to me. Like, I will fight them to the end for this. But for other things, honestly, I just have to let it go. I have to let it go and fight bigger battles and focus on my work, because you really have to figure out what works for you and prioritize safeguarding your mental health and your bag. And your bag. So yeah, I am ending here on my days. I have absolutely loved, these two videos that I've done. I will leave a link to part one. Highly encourage you to watch it if you hadn't. I have loved this topic. Super nice, super inspiring. It was more like a refresher. I also learned a lot from my two consultants. Huge, huge, huge thanks to them for the insight that they've given us. I truly hope it will be of help to any of you who are watching this, who find yourselves in a situation where, you're trying to pivot, you're trying to upgrade, you're trying to get a new job, you're trying to get your first job. I truly hope that these, tips will be helpful. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you next time.